If an aircraft is loaded so that the aft CG limit is exceeded, what undesirable flight characteristic is likely to result? The aircraft will be tail-heavy and may be unable to recover from a stall or a spin. If all the records for an aircraft are missing, how would you determine the empty weight and empty weight CG? The aircraft would have to be weighed, and new weight and balance records would have to be prepared. Define tare weight, and describe how it is handled when weighing an aircraft. Tare weight is the weight of anything on the scales that is not part of the aircraft. It must be subtracted from the scale weight reading to determine the net weight of the airplane. If a piece of equipment, such as a radio, is added to an aircraft, how can you determine the effect on weight and balance without reweighing the aircraft? If the weight and balance records are up to date, a new weight and CG location can be determined by computation. Why is control of the weight and balance of an aircraft important? To provide maximum safety. What is the datum of an aircraft and what is its function? The datum is an imaginary vertical plane at right angles to the longitudinal axis of the airplane. It is the reference point from which all horizontal measurements are taken. How do you determine the moment of an item of equipment? The weight of the item is multiplied by its arm, which is the distance between the item and the datum. What are the two ways of determining the arm of an item of equipment? Measuring the distance between the item and the datum, or use data supplied by the manufacturer. What should be done to obtain a positive moment after the datum? Add weight. What should be done to obtain a negative moment after the datum? Remove weight. What should be done to obtain a positive moment forward of the datum? Remove weight. What should be done to obtain negative moment forward of the datum? Add weight. How does the category of an aircraft affect its loaded weight? Aircraft certificated in more than one category, such as normal and aerobatic, may have two different maximum gross weights and different useful loads. As you prepare an aircraft for weighing, you determine that there is equipment aboard that is not permanently installed and recorded on the equipment list. What should you do with this equipment? All equipment not permanently installed in the aircraft or included on the equipment list should be removed from the aircraft. Define the term residual fuel. Any fuel that remains in the tanks, lines, and engines after the system has been drained. Define the term residual oil. Any oil that remains in the tanks, lines, and engine after the system has been drained. How should you account for fuel when weighing an aircraft to determine weight and balance? Either drain the fuel system until only usable fuel remains, or fill the tanks full and subtract out the weight of the usable fuel. Where are leveling instructions found? And describe one method of leveling an aircraft. Leveling instructions are found in the type certificate datasheet. An aircraft may be leveled by using a spirit level at specified points, or an aircraft may be leveled by using a plumb bob from a designated point along with a leveling scale or a protractor. Define the term mean aerodynamic chord, or MAC. Mean aerodynamic chord is the chord drawn through the center of the wing. Describe the two most common ways of showing the CG location and CG ranges. In inches from the datum or percentage of MAC. What is the purpose of an aircraft loading graph? It is a method for determining how to distribute the load so as to keep the CG within allowable limits. What is ballast, and why would you use it in an airplane? Ballast is weight added to the airplane to bring its CG into the allowable or desired range. Installation of several new radios in the nose of an aircraft caused the forward CG limit to be exceeded. How can you correct this problem without removing the new equipment? Ballast may be installed in the tail to move the CG aft. How does the CG range of a helicopter compare to that of a fixed-wing airplane? Helicopters typically have much smaller CG ranges. Is there any requirement for cleaning aircraft prior to an annual or 100-hour inspection? It is not only good common sense, but it is a legal requirement as specified in FAR Part 43, Appendix D. Discuss the general precautions that should be observed when washing an airplane. Avoid and protect areas which may be damaged or contaminated, such as pitot and static ports, hinges, sealed areas, and bearings. What are some of the more common light-duty cleaning agents? Soap or detergents and water. What are some of the commonly used heavy-duty cleaners? Solvents and emulsions. What are the preferred cleaners for plastic surfaces such as windshields? Mild soap and water, or a manufacturer's approved cleaner. What type of cleaning agent should be used to remove grease, oil, or fuel from aircraft tires? Soap and water. Give at least 3 examples of factors that cause or influence corrosion. The environmental conditions, the presence of dissimilar metal, the type of metal, the presence of electrolytes and or contaminants, the conditions of protective coatings. Name at least 3 forms of corrosion. Surface, intergranular, filiform, dissimilar metal or galvanic, oxidation, pitting, stress, and fretting. Name at least 1 cause of filiform corrosion. Improper or incomplete curing of wash primer prior to painting, or failure to completely wash off acidic surface contamination. What are the visible signs of filiform corrosion? Blistered paint surfaces, or worm or thread-like tracks or patterns under the paint. What are the two primary factors that may cause development of stress corrosion cracks? A corrosive environment and sustained tensile stress. What are the visible signs of fretting corrosion? The corrosion residue has a dark, smoky appearance, and it often appears around and streaming back from the rivet heads. Why are piano hinges a prime spot for corrosion? The steel pin and aluminum hinge material are dissimilar metals, and the hinge design tends to trap moisture and contaminants. What is the best way to protect piano hinges from corrosion? Keep them clean and properly lubricated. Provide at least 4 examples of procedures used to prevent corrosion. Cleaning, lubrication, treatment, sealing, inspection, installing protective covers, keeping drain holes free and clear. Describe the tools that should be used to remove corrosion from anodized aluminum surfaces. A nylon scrubber pad, such as Scotch-Brite, bristle brushes, aluminum wool, or aluminum wire brushes. Describe the effects of using steel brushes or steel wool to remove corrosion from an aluminum surface. Steel brushes or steel wool must not be used to clean aluminum because steel particles can become embedded in aluminum and cause corrosion. What is the purpose of iodine? Iodine is a chemical process that deposits a protective film on aluminum alloys. This film improves corrosion resistance and paint adhesion. For what reason should you avoid cleaning anodized aluminum surfaces with aluminum metal polish? Aluminum metal polish should not be used on anodized aluminum surfaces because it will remove the anodized coating. Why should aircraft fabric and plastics be cleaned only with recommended cleaners? Recommended cleaners cause the least amount of deterioration or damage. List at least 5 examples of areas in an aircraft that are prone to corrosion. Battery compartments, exhaust trail areas, bilge areas, vent areas, landing gear and wheel wells, fuel tanks, wing flap recesses, around and below galleys and lavatories, piano hinges, any area that can trap water. Describe the result of adding a large positive number and a small negative number. The result is a smaller positive number, and it is the same as ignoring the signs and subtracting the smaller number from the larger number. How do you convert a fraction into a decimal? By dividing the top number by the bottom number. What is the key step that must be performed in order to add or subtract unlike fractions? You must find the lowest common denominator. How do you divide one fraction by another? You invert the divisor and multiply the numerators together and the denominators together. How can you convert a decimal into a percent? By multiplying the decimal by 100 and adding the percent sign. Or you can move the decimal point 2 places to the right and add the percent sign. How do you convert a fraction into a percent? Convert it into a decimal. Move the decimal point 2 places to the right and add the percent sign. How do you change a decimal into the nearest equivalent fraction? Multiply the decimal by the desired denominator. The result becomes the numerator of the fraction. What are the two different ways the ratio may be expressed? As a fraction, or by placing a colon between the two numbers. You may also use the number 2 between the two numbers. What is a proportion? A statement of equality between two or more ratios. What is meant by the root of a number? A root is two or more equal smaller numbers that when multiplied together equal the specified number. How do you find the square of a number? And give an example. By multiplying the number by itself. An example is 4 times 4 equals 16. What is a common method of making computations involving very large or very small numbers more manageable? Convert the numbers into scientific notation by using powers of 10. How is 100,000 expressed as a power of 10? 10 to the fifth power. What formula is used to find the area of a rectangle and of a triangle? For a rectangle, it would be area equals length times width. And for a triangle, it would be area equals 1/2 base times height. Define pi. Pi is a constant that expresses the relationship between the circumference of a circle and the diameter, and it is approximately equal to 3.1416. Describe a trapezoid. A trapezoid is a closed four-sided figure having two parallel sides and two sides that are not parallel. What is the formula for computing the area of a circle? Area equals pi r squared. Define matter. Any substance that occupies space and has mass. Matter may exist in what three states? Solid, liquid, and gas. Define kinetic energy. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion. Work is the product of what two factors? Force and the distance moved. What are the parts of a lever? A rigid bar and a pivot point called the fulcrum. A wheelbarrow is an example of what class of lever? A second class lever. Are all three states of matter affected by thermal expansion? And if so, which state is affected the most? Yes, all three states are affected, and gases are affected the most. What is the British thermal unit? Is the amount of heat required to change the temperature of 1 pound of water by 1 degree Fahrenheit? Name the three methods of heat transfer. Conduction, convection, and radiation. What term defines the temperature at which all molecular motion ceases? Absolute zero.
Can liquids be compressed? No, liquids are generally considered incompressible. What are the customary units used to express hydraulic and pneumatic pressure in the United States? Pounds per square inch. Describe how pressure is transmitted when a force is applied to a confined liquid. Pressure is transmitted equally in all directions. What formula expresses the relationship between force, pressure, and area? Force equals pressure times area. What is the approximate speed of sound at sea level on a standard day? (661 knots). What is the atmospheric pressure at sea level on a standard day? 29.92 inches of mercury. On a standard day at sea level, what is the value for temperature? 59 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 degrees Celsius. What are the factors that determine density altitude? Temperature and atmospheric pressure. What is the term used to describe the ratio between the amount of moisture actually present in the atmosphere as compared to the amount the air could hold if it were completely saturated? Relative humidity. What are the four principal forces acting on an airplane in flight? Lift, drag, thrust, and gravity. What is the term that describes the angle between the relative wind and the chord line of an airfoil? The angle of attack. What are the factors that cause an airplane wing to stall? A stall is caused when the angle of attack exceeds a critical value and the airflow separates from the upper surface and becomes turbulent. What are the principal effects that result from lowering the flaps while in flight? Lift increases, drag increases, and stall speed decreases. What is the function of a wing-mounted vortex generator? Vortex generators delay or keep the airflow from separating from the upper surface of a wing during high-speed flights. How does blade flapping help to compensate for dissymmetry of lift in helicopter main rotor systems? Flapping increases the angle of attack and lift on the retreating blade and decreases the angle of attack and lift on the advancing blade. How does the airflow through the main rotor of a helicopter change during the transition from normal flight to auto rotation? During normal flight, the air moves downward, and during auto rotation, the air moves upward. What is friction? The opposition to relative motion between two objects in contact with each other. How many views are required to represent the important details of most aircraft parts? One, two, or three views are usually enough. What kind of parts can be represented by one view drawings? Parts with uniform thickness, such as shims, plates, and gaskets. What is the name for a part or drawing used to bring out important details, and how is it drawn? A detailed view, which is usually drawn to a larger scale than the main drawing. What is the purpose of a schematic diagram? They're primarily used for troubleshooting systems. Describe an orthographic projection. It is a way of drawing an object using different views at right angles to each other, such as top, front, and side views. Why do manufacturers use symbols on aircraft drawings? Symbols are a form of shorthand, and they are used to convey the characteristics of a component with a minimum amount of drawing. Describe the appearance of lines used to show hidden views, alternate positions, and the middle of symmetrical objects, and give their proper names. Hidden views are shown with hidden lines, which are short, evenly spaced dashes. Alternate positions are shown with phantom lines, made up of light alternating long dashes and two short dashes. Center lines, consisting of alternating long and short dashes, show the middle of symmetrical objects. How can you determine if a drawing has been changed? A record of the changes is listed either in a revision block or in ruled columns, which may be in the corner of a drawing or next to the title block. How are dimensions shown on aircraft drawings, and what is their purpose? Dimension lines are usually solid and generally broken at midpoint for insertions of the measurement. They provide a means of accurately representing the size of an object. What is the difference between an allowance and a tolerance? An allowance is the difference between the nominal dimensions and the maximum and minimum permissible sizes. The tolerance is the difference between the extreme permissible dimensions, which may be found by adding the plus and minus allowances. What is meant by clearance when it is used on aircraft drawings? An allowable dimension between two parts. What kinds of information about an aircraft drawing can be found in the title block? The part or assembly name, drawing size, scale, date, company name, or initials of the person responsible for creating and improving the drawing. What information is contained in a bill of materials? It is a list of the materials and the parts needed to fabricate or assemble the component or system shown in the drawing.
What is indicated by the markings on the heads of solid shank rivets? The material that they are made of, and indirectly their strengths. How can you keep heat-treated aluminum alloy rivets soft enough to install after the quenching process? If the rivets are stored in a freezer, they remain soft for several days. What is the grip length of a bolt? It is the length of the unthreaded portion. In what ways are AN standard bolts identified? By the code markings on the bolt heads. What is the difference between a close tolerance bolt and a general purpose bolt? Close tolerance bolts are machined to more accurate dimensions. For what types of application are self-locking nuts not allowed? Self-locking nuts may not be used when either the bolt or the nut is subject to rotation. If the maintenance procedures do not specify a torque value for a bolt or a nut, how can you determine the proper values? By consulting a standard torque table such as found in AC 4313-1B. What is the most commonly used type of aircraft control cable? Extra flexible 7x19 stainless steel cable. What type of precision measuring instruments can be used to measure the outside dimension of aircraft parts? Outside micrometers and vernier calipers. For what reason should a micrometer be periodically calibrated? If dropped, its accuracy may be affected, or if the spindle is over-tightened, the frame may be sprung, or continually sliding objects between the anvil and the spindle may wear the surfaces. How do you work harden a piece of metal? By cold working the metal. Describe the primary difference between a thermosetting and a thermoplastic resin. Thermosetting resin doesn't soften when heated, and chars and burns rather than melting. Thermoplastic resins become soft and pliable when heated, and harden when cooled. Explain how thermoplastics and thermosetting resins are commonly used on modern aircraft. Plexiglass is a thermoplastic resin, commonly used for windshields and windows. Thermosetting resins are often used as the matrix material in composite structures. Name one type of resin commonly used as the matrix material for aircraft composite laminates. Polyester resin or epoxy resin. What are some of the materials that are commonly used as the reinforcing component in a composite structure? Fiberglass, Kevlar, graphite, linen, and paper. What are the reasons that alloy steel that is responsive to heat treatment is usually less suitable for welding? It may become brittle and lose its ductility in the area of the weld. Give one advantage of prepreg materials, other than saving time in the construction or repair of composite components. Prepreg fabrics contain the correct amount of matrix. The matrix material evenly and completely permeates the reinforcing fibers, and the matrix has the resin and the hardener in the correct proportions.
1 kilowatt is equal to how many watts? (1,000 watts). What law describes the most fundamental or basic relationship in an electrical circuit? Ohm's law. What are the three elements of Ohm's law? Voltage, current, and resistance. How would you write Ohm's law as an equation? Voltage equals current times resistance. If the resistance in a DC circuit remains the same, but the voltage doubles, what happens to the amount of current flowing in the circuit? It also doubles. In DC circuits, what unit measures power? Watts. What three elements are required to form an electrical circuit? A source of electrical energy, a load or resistance to use the electricity, and wires or conductors to connect the source to the load. DC circuits can take one of three forms or types. What are they? Series, parallel, and complex. A 24-volt lead-acid battery has how many cells? 12. A fully charged lead-acid battery has a specific gravity that varies between what two values? 1.275 and 1.3. You must apply a correction to the specific gravity readings of the electrolyte of a lead-acid battery when the temperature is outside of what two values? Whenever the temperature is less than 70 degrees and more than 90 degrees. What is the reason for having separate facilities for storing and servicing nickel, cadmium, and lead-acid batteries? The electrolyte in the two types of batteries is chemically opposite, and the fumes from one type can contaminate the electrolyte of the other type. The state of charge of a nickel-cadmium battery cannot be determined by measuring the specific gravity of the electrolyte. For what reason? There is no significant change in the specific gravity of the electrolyte as the battery is charged or discharged. What is the principal advantage of AC current over DC current? Power can be transmitted over longer distances more efficiently and with smaller wires because the voltage can be easily increased or decreased by transformers. What are the three causes of opposition to current flow in an AC circuit? Resistance, inductive reactance, and capacitive reactance. Define inductance. An induced voltage which is opposite in the direction of the applied voltage. What component creates capacitance in an AC circuit? A capacitor. How does a capacitor store electricity? The energy is stored in the form of an electrostatic charge, or field, that exists between two conductors separated by an insulator. What property of an AC circuit is defined by the term impedance? The total opposition to current flow. What are the two reasons that might cause a nickel cadmium battery to fail to deliver its rated capacity? Faulty cells or cell imbalance. What electrical values are measured with a typical multimeter? Voltage, current, and resistance. What are the two types of fluid lines commonly found in aircraft? Rigid metal lines and flexible hoses. Describe the method of classifying metal tube according to size. Metal tubing is sized according to wall thickness and outside diameter. Outside diameter is measured in 1/16 of an inch increments. When installing stainless steel tubing, what type of fitting should be used? Stainless steel fittings. What is the function of the sleeve on a flared tube fitting? The nut fits over the sleeve and draws the sleeve and the tubing flare tightly against the male fitting to form the seal. Describe the two types of flares commonly used on aircraft tubing. The single flare and the double flare. How can you determine if a fitting is an AN type rather than an AC type? AN fittings have a shoulder between the flare cone and the end of the threads. AC fittings do not. What are the most significant differences between AN and AC fittings? Sleeve length, thread pitch, and the shoulder between the threads and the flare cone on the AN fitting. What are the names of the parts of a flareless tube fitting? The nut and the ferrule, or sleeve. How do you tell a flareless fitting from a flare type fitting? Flareless fittings do not have a flare cone, and there's no space between the threads and the end of the fitting. What is the effect of over-tightening a flare type fitting? The sealing surface may be damaged or the flare cut off. In addition to being securely clamped, what is an additional requirement for installing metal fuel, oil, and hydraulic lines? The lines must be electrically bonded to the structure. What are some of the important advantages of Teflon tubing? Is compatible with nearly every liquid, has a broad operating temperature range, low resistance to fluid flow, and has a very long shelf life and service life. Describe the identification marks commonly found on flexible hoses. A ley line. Identification such as mil spec number, the manufacturer's name or symbol, the hose size, and a date code. How can you determine if a flexible hose has been correctly installed? The ley line will be straight if the hose is properly installed. A twisted ley line indicates an incorrect installation. How are flexible hose sizes designated? By the inside diameter, measured in 1/16 inch increments. What precautions must be observed when deburring the end of a tube after it is cut? The wall thickness must not be reduced in size or fractured. Describe the operation of quick disconnect couplings. Each half has a valve that is held open when coupled and is spring-loaded closed when disconnected. If you fabricate a replacement for a flexible hose, what percentage of the total length must be allowed for movement under pressure? Five to 8%. What happens to the tube when a flareless fitting is over-tightened? The tube is weakened when the nut drives the cutting edge of the sleeve too deeply into the tube. Why are quick disconnect fittings used? To provide a quick means to connect or disconnect a fluid line without loss of fluid or entrance of air into the system. Name at least three possible hazards that may be encountered during typical ground operations, such as during engine run-up or taxiing. The possibility of fire, especially during engine starting, turning props, rotors, or jet blast in inlet areas, other aircraft, vehicles, people, and obstacles, foreign objects such as rocks, gravel, rags, or loose hardware, high noise levels that may cause hearing damage, hydraulic lock in radial engines, weather vaning of tailwheel aircraft. What is the most generally used knot for tying down small aircraft? The bowline knot. Describe the precautions that should be taken to protect life and property while starting and running an aircraft engine. Study the procedures in the airplane flight manual. Be sure the propeller or inlet area is clear and check for loose stones, gravel, etc. that could be stuck into the prop or engine. Also, ensure that the prop or jet blast area does not blow into hangars or other airplanes and have a fire guard nearby. If an engine induction fire occurs while starting a reciprocating engine, what procedures should be followed to extinguish the fire? Continue cranking the engine to start it and suck the fire into the engine. If the engine doesn't start and the fire continues to burn, discontinue the start attempt and extinguish the fire with a suitable fire extinguisher. What safety procedures must be observed when hand propping a small aircraft engine? Become thoroughly trained. Have a qualified person in the cockpit check the brakes, call, switch off before moving the prop, and make sure you have solid footing. When ready to start, call contact and listen for the reply. Swing the prop the flat of your hand and move back from the prop arc. What procedures should be followed prior to starting a large radial engine to detect and or prevent a hydrolock in the cylinders? Pull the propeller by hand for 3 or 4 complete revolutions. Resistance to the prop turning indicates a possible hydraulic lock in at least one of the cylinders. What is the cause of hydraulic lock in large radial engines? Oil seeps by the piston rings and accumulates in the combustion chamber of low cylinders. When a piston comes up on its compression stroke, the incompressible liquid seizes it. What is meant by the term hot start when starting a jet engine? Ignition occurs with an excessively rich mixture, leading to a rapid temperature rise that can exceed the exhaust gas temperature limit. When towing an aircraft, should you use the tow vehicle or aircraft brakes to stop the aircraft? The tow vehicle brakes should be used, except in an emergency. Then the aircraft brakes may be used. Why should an aircraft technician become familiar with standard light signals? Light signals may be used when taxiing an airplane without a radio or when a radio becomes inoperative on a tower-controlled airport. If a mixture of aviation gasoline and jet fuel is used in a reciprocating aircraft engine, what are the possible results? Avgas contaminated by jet fuel must not be used in piston engines. The engine may be damaged or destroyed. What does the number 100 signify in 100 low lead aviation gasoline? It refers to the lean mixture performance number or octane rating of the fuel. Is it permissible to use avgas in a turbine engine? Limited operation may be allowed by the manufacturer. Continued use may reduce efficiency due to lead deposits on the turbine blades. What are some of the possible outcomes of using a lower grade of avgas than the specified grade? An increased chance of engine damage due to detonation, loss of engine power, and an increased possibility of overheating. Part 23.973 of the FAA regulations specify that certain markings must be placed adjacent to fuel filler openings. What markings are used for reciprocating engine powered airplanes? The filler openings must be marked with the fuel grade and the word avgas. Describe the important precautions that should be observed when fueling an aircraft. Be certain you're using the correct fuel. Properly ground the aircraft and refueling unit, and protect the aircraft surface from hose and nozzle damage. The marking requirements for oil tank filler openings are specified by FAR 23.1157. What markings are required for a piston engine powered airplane? The word oil and the permissible grades and/or types, or a reference to the appropriate airplane flight manual for permissible grades and/or types. Where can the standard aircraft taxi hand signals be found? In the Aeronautical Information Manual. AIM. Under what conditions should a reciprocating engine be pre-oiled? Prior to starting a new engine or one that has been preserved for storage. This ensures adequate lubrication on initial startup. Under what conditions may automobile gasoline be used in aircraft engines? Only if approved by the FAA, typically by the issuance of a supplemental type certificate. What are the indications of water in aircraft fuel after draining a sample from the fuel sumps? The sample may have a cloudy or hazy appearance or a solid slug of water. What federal aviation regulation prescribes the requirements for the issuance of a type certificate? FAR Part 21. What part of the FARs describe the airworthiness standards for transport category airplanes? FAR Part 25. What part of the FARs describes the performance characteristics that a small aircraft must demonstrate in order to be airworthy? FAR Part 23. Who is responsible for ensuring that only the most current information is used when performing maintenance on an aircraft? The person performing the maintenance. Why are airworthiness directives issued? To correct unsafe conditions found in aircraft, engines, propellers, or appliances. How does the FAA notify aircraft owners of unsafe conditions that must be corrected? By issuing airworthiness directives. How do you determine the time frame within which AD compliance is required? The AD contains the compliance time, or period for completing the corrective action. If a mechanic wishes to develop a checklist for an annual inspection or 100-hour inspection, what publications contains the guidelines for the required inspection items? FAR Part 43, Appendix D. How can you determine if the repair of damage is a major or minor repair? FAR Part 43, Appendix A defines major and minor repairs as well as preventative maintenance. What publication might you consult for guidance when maintaining old aircraft which no maintenance manuals exist? AC 4313-1B. What are advisory circulars? Non-regulatory information of interest to the aviation public. What publication would you consult to determine an aircraft, type, design, and its limitation? The type certificate data sheets. In what FAA publication would you find a list of engines approved for use in a specific make and model of airplane? The type certificate data sheets. What reference material can be used to determine if an aircraft is certified in more than one category? The type certificate data sheet. What is the name of the manual that the manufacturer provides to technicians who normally perform work on the systems and components of an aircraft? The aircraft maintenance manual. Under which circumstances is compliance with a manufacturer's service bulletin mandatory? When the service bulletin is incorporated in an AD. What kinds of publications are used by aircraft manufacturers to notify owners of design defects and product improvements? Service bulletins, service letters, and service instructions. If you need to determine the serviceable dimension limits for an engine part, what publication would you consult? The current engine manufacturer's overhaul manual. How often is the summary of ADs published? Every 2 years. As a certified mechanic, will you automatically receive all ADs? No, ADs are automatically sent only to registered aircraft owners. How are AD updates issued to subscribers of the Summary of Airworthiness Directives? Through bi-weekly supplements. Where do you find the minimum scope and detail requirements that a 100-hour inspection checklist must contain? FAR Part 43, Appendix D. Records of major alterations must be made in what two places? The Aircraft Maintenance Record and FAA Form 337. When completion of an FAA Form 337 is required, how many copies are normally prepared and what are their distribution? Two signed copies. One is given to the aircraft owner, and one is sent to the local FAA Flight Standards District Office within 48 hours of the approval or return to service. When an aircraft is sold, what do the regulations require regarding the disposition of records that contain the current status of airworthiness directives? The seller must transfer the records to the buyer at the time of sale. For what period of time must an aircraft owner maintain the records of a 100-hour inspection? Until the work is superseded or for 1 year after the inspection. In what publication may a mechanic find an example of a maintenance record entry for a 100-hour inspection? FAR Part 43.11. Where should the 100-hour inspection be recorded? In the appropriate maintenance record for the airframe, power plant, propeller, or appliance. What items must be entered into the aircraft records after maintenance is performed? A description of the work performed and/or reference to acceptable data, the date the work was completed, the signature, certificate number, and type of certificate of the person approving the aircraft for return to service. What person makes the final maintenance record entry after a 100-hour inspection is completed? The person approving the aircraft for return to service. What document must be prepared when a required inspection is performed and defects are found, which render the aircraft or engine unairworthy. The required maintenance entries must be made, and a list of discrepancies and unairworthy items must be furnished to the owner. What maintenance record entries are required to contain the aircraft total time in service? Only records of inspections require the total time. What regulation authorizes certificated mechanics who hold an inspection authorization to approve or disapprove a major repair or alteration? FAR 65.95. Who has the authority to rebuild an aircraft engine and return the operating time to zero? Only the engine manufacturer or an overhaul facility approved by the manufacturer. Are there any circumstances when more than 2 copies of Form 337 are required, and if so, when? Yes, 3 copies are required when a fuel tank is installed in the passenger or baggage compartment. The third copy must be kept aboard the aircraft. How do the regulations define time of service in regards to maintenance record entries? With respect to maintenance entries, time in service begins when the aircraft leaves the surface of the Earth until it touches it at the next point of landing. What are the penalties for making fraudulent or intentionally false entries in any required record or report? The applicable airman certificates can be suspended or revoked. What persons are authorized to make the required maintenance entries approving for return to service after progressive inspection is performed at a location other than the aircraft's home base? A certified mechanic, an appropriately rated repair station, or the aircraft manufacturer. What is the difference between the terms overhaul and rebuild as they pertain to aircraft engine maintenance records? Overhauled engines must be tested to approved or acceptable current standards and technical data. Rebuilt engines must be tested to the same tolerance and limits as a new engine. When performing an inspection required by FAR Part 91, what rotorcraft systems must be inspected in accordance with the manufacturer's maintenance manual or instructions for continued airworthiness? The drive shaft or similar systems, the main rotor transmission gearbox for obvious defects, the main rotor and center section, the auxiliary rotor on helicopters. How can you determine that an aircraft part or appliance you receive is serviceable? By an approval for return to service in the maintenance record for the part or appliance with a completed Form 337. What publication should a mechanic consult to determine if a repair is considered major or minor? 14 CFR Part 43 Appendix A. Where in the FARs will you find the certificate requirements for mechanics? FAR Part 65. What are the ratings issued under a mechanic's certificate? Airframe and power plant. What type of work may a certified mechanic perform? A mechanic may perform or supervise maintenance, preventative maintenance, or alterations. Is a certified airframe mechanic allowed to perform maintenance on engines? Not unless they are supervised by a certified power plant mechanic.
What are the limitations to a mechanic's privileges with regards to propellers? A mechanic may not perform or supervise major repairs or major alterations of propellers. Is a mechanic allowed to repair or alter an aircraft instrument? No. Mechanics may not perform any repairs or alterations to instruments. What are the requirements for recent experience in order to exercise the privileges of your mechanic certificate or rating? You must have worked as a mechanic or technically supervised other mechanics for at least 6 months out of the past 24 months. What authority does a mechanic have regarding approval for return to service? A mechanic may approve an aircraft airframe, engine, propeller, or appliance for return to service in accordance with the provisions of FAR Part 65. What are the privileges of an A&P mechanic regarding inspections? A mechanic may perform and approve for return to service an airframe or engine following a 100-hour inspection. What is the duration of mechanic's certificate? The certificate is valid until surrendered, suspended, or revoked. What are the privileges and limitations of an A&P mechanic regarding major repairs and alterations to airframes and engines and their approval for return to service? A&P mechanics may perform major repairs and alterations, but may not approve them for return to service unless they hold an inspection authorization. In addition to performing maintenance, what other privileges are granted to power plant mechanics? A power plant mechanic may perform a 100-hour inspection on an engine and approve the engine for return to service. When may a mechanic perform an annual inspection and return the aircraft to service? When the mechanic holds an inspection authorization. May a mechanic supervise an inspection or a portion of an inspection and then approve the aircraft for return to service? No. The mechanic approving the aircraft for return to service must actually perform the inspection. What is the duration of a temporary airman certificate? 120 days. If a mechanic's certificate is revoked, how long must he or she wait before applying for a new certificate? 1 year, unless the revocation order states otherwise. What should a mechanic do if his or her temporary certificate is about to expire? Contact a local FAA office and seek assistance. Is a person with a private pilot certificate allowed to perform maintenance, and if so, what are his or her limitations? A pilot may perform preventative maintenance in accordance with FAR Part 43.3 and 43.7 and Appendix A on an airplane owned by the pilot. He or she can also approve the aircraft for return to service following that maintenance. What are your requirements as an aircraft mechanic when you have a change of address? You must notify the FAA in writing within 30 days of any change to your permanent address. Describe the steps involved in a dye penetrant inspection. The surface is cleaned, and then the penetrant is applied and allowed to dwell for a specified time. The penetrant is then removed with emulsifier or cleaner. Once removed, the part is dried, and then developer is applied. The results are then inspected and interpreted. Name some tools that are commonly used to assist in making visual inspection of welds. A magnifying glass, a flashlight, mirror, and possibly a borescope. What are some of the non-destructive testing methods that may be used on aluminum parts? Visual, dye penetrant, eddy current, ultrasonic testing, and radiography. What process occurs during the penetration stage of dye penetrant inspection, when the penetrating liquid is applied and then removed from a cracked part? The penetrant enters the crack by capillary action and remains there until made visible by the developer. A correctly made butt weld will have what bead width and how much penetration? The bead width should be 3 to 5 times the thickness of the base metal, and there should be 100% penetration. What telltale characteristics are evidence of a cold weld? A cold weld has rough, irregular edges that are not feathered into the base metal and has variations in penetration amounts. The penetration of a fillet weld should be what percentage of the thickness of base metal? (25 to 50%). Describe the basic steps for conducting a magnetic particle inspection. Magnetize the part, then coat the surface with ferromagnetic particles. If a defect or discontinuity is present, the particles align with the discontinuity, forming a visible pattern.